Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this Friday afternoon for such an important conversation. In 4 days, we mark the year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. And it's a year that we've all experienced in myriad ways, deep personal grief and fear and uncertainty, anxiety, a kind of new understanding of our country, our society, and of who we are as individuals, our own histories, our own biases, our own backgrounds, our own relationships. And that sparked a national reckoning, as I said, of us as individuals, as organizations, as communities. And, within our own community, we have reached inside to really understand these kinds of dynamics. And during last summer, Associate Dean Adozi and I had lots of conversations about these. And through her leadership and innovation and creativity, we launched the McCormack Racial Equity Task Force, and it's been, the participants have been faculty and students and staff from across the McCormack departments and centers, and we've focused on a whole range of different kinds of activities to advance conversations, to advance our own understanding, to advance improving who we are as individuals in a community. And one of those things has been through these kinds of events where we get a distinguished speaker to help us challenge ourselves and struggle with these issues and come out better for it. I will not be fully introducing her. That's Associate Tina Dozy will be doing that, but we are delighted to have Dr. Tina Harris here with us today, a leader in this area, exactly talking about these kinds of dynamics on the individual, on the classroom, on the institutional level. So it's such an honor, Dr. Harris, to have you here with us today. Such an honor, particularly at this moment of our national reckoning, and particularly in this moment as we're about to mark the year anniversary. So with that, I would love to hand the floor over to Associate Dean Dozy. I believe that's who's next on our schedule. So again, gratitude to Dr. Harris. I'm so looking forward to this event.
Thank you, David, and welcome, Dr. Harris, and welcome everyone. I mean, I don't want to just repeat everything that David has said, but the sentiments, are so important. So I'm going to have to look, amidst COVID-19 pandemic, this past year, and the racial strife that typified the George Floyd police murder and trial, provides momentum for us all. At this university, UMass Boston, we had a new chancellor and a new provost who made, and specifically the language was anti-racism, and health promotion as the new mission for the university. All the colleges, rose to the occasion, especially ours. The McCormack Graduate School used the moment to establish the McCormack Racial Equity Task Force. We call it MRET. And our goals are ambitious, no doubt. We want to diversify and retain an inclusive faculty. We want to diversify and increase the enrollment of a diverse doctoral student body at the college. We also want to diversify and retain, a dynamic, inclusive, talented staff. We want to diversify our curriculum. We want to improve an inclusive and cross-cultural climate. And we want to collaborate with university-wide diversity initiatives like our Restorative Justice um, committee, and as well as, with our communities, both locally, nationally, and globally. So we are really honored to have Dr. Tina Harris collectively labor with us, in achieving our goals as well. Now, let me turn to presenting some really important credentials of why we have chosen Dr. Harris to help us in our efforts. First off, she's got a student in the room, and he's one of our faculty members, and his name is Dr. Jeff Pugh, who is, assistant professor with our Department of Conflict Resolution, Global Governance, and Human Security. If we could spotlight him so that we could reconnect him with his former professor, now our inaugural speaker in this effort, that would be great. If we could connect them. But let me talk about Dr. Tina Harris, who really has the distinct pleasure of being the nation's first endowed chair of race, media, and cultural literacy in the Manship School of Mass Communication at Louisiana State University. Her primary research interest is interracial communication, with specific foci on critical communication pedagogy, race, and identity. She looks at diversity in media representations, racial social justice, mentoring, and racial reconciliation. Dr. Harris is the daughter of a military family, and she spent part of her early childhood in Spain, setting the foundation for her introduction to different cultures and her thoughts about the importance of being bilingual and multilingual. Upon entering university, her master's thesis focused on the racial makeup of the University of Georgia Law School, and her doctoral research focused on interracial dating and romantic relationships. Um, since 1998, Dr. Tina Harris has been teaching business and professional communication, communication theory, interracial communication, media, and multiculturalism, race, gender, and political communications. And she is the co-author of a textbook entitled Interracial Communication, Theory and Practice. As a prolific scholar, Dr. Harris publishes in top journals within the communication discipline and has authored several journal articles and book chapters on diversity, equity, and inclusion, intersectionality in the classroom, allyship, and race in the US, and the use of film to teach students about the issue of race. She is regularly invited to contribute original research to books, top tier peer reviewed articles and journals, and encyclopedias in other disciplines. Because her expertise, as we know, is vast, innovative, and of the highest quality. She is the recipient of more than 30 teaching and research accolades, including the NCA's 2019 Robert Kilber Memorial Award for her dedication to excellence, commitment to the profession, concern for others, vision, acceptance of diversity, and forthrightness. In 2000, again, she received the Francine Merit Award for outstanding contributions to the lives of women in communication for making a difference in the field of communication through mentoring, service, advocacy, teaching, and scholarship. Finally, there is a final. Tina is a very active senior scholar with many accolades, as we have seen, and awards for her long-standing history of making valuable contributions to the discipline, the university, and to the department where she teaches. in the areas of teaching, research, and service. So we're really excited to have Dr. Harris, who has titled a conversation with us called Difficult Conversations. Now I missed the slide. Difficult Conversations in the Classroom, Addressing Racism, Communication, and Social Justice. Dr. Harris, we are so grateful for your joining us. We're so excited to look forward to your presentation. You have the floor.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I was exhausted just hearing all the stuff that I'm doing. So it means I'm probably doing just a little bit too much. But I first want to take a moment to thank Dean Cash and Associate Dean Edozie for this wonderful opportunity to speak with you all. When I was contacted, I was kind of surprised because I was like, wait, I don't think I know anybody there, but now I know that I do. And it's my honor to be the inaugural speaker for this very important series. And I honestly tell you that I'm super excited, about speaking with you all today and talking about some issues that are near and dear to my heart. And I hope that as I share with you my research experience and expertise, that at least I hope that each one of you can walk away with something that can help. This may sound a little bit cliche, but to help make our world a better place, then it's all worth worth the effort and the time. So now I'm going to go ahead and share with you all my screen, and I hope you all enjoy. Well, not looking at all the tabs, but I hope you enjoy the content. So you all already know the title of the talk. I won't go through that, but I did want to highlight a couple of things in terms of my area of research. Sometimes it's a little bit hard for me to narrow it down, but given today's occasion, I thought it was important to highlight at least 4 areas that are very important to me, which include interracial communication, critical race pedagogy, race and media representations, as well as religious identity, communication, and race. So you can see the common thread across those different areas is race. And I would also go a bit further to say that I think that race, ethnicity, and culture are interrelated, they're interconnected, and they really play a critical role in helping shape not only our identities, but how we choose to communicate with each other. And the picture right there is of the last group, or the second group of students, and not second, I'm sorry. This is a photo of students who are in my study abroad program in Costa Rica, which I'll be talking about in just a moment. All right, so when I think about the purpose of teaching, why do I teach? I would say that over the last several years, or maybe even longer, I have come to the realization that much of my work centers around molding students to be global citizens. So what does that mean? That means that my students, hopefully, and I'm not going to say that I can take responsibility for all these skills being honed in the classroom, but I at least encourage them to reflect and think about the way they communicate with people who are different from them, and ultimately how are they going to use this knowledge that they're learning in the classroom and applying it to the real world context. That doesn't mean that our classrooms aren't real, but it means that we are in a space where we are educating them with knowledge, and we're empowering them to make a difference in the spaces they're going to occupy post-graduation, or sometimes it's the spaces that they are navigating while they are matriculating through our various institutions. And so there's a skill set that I think is very extensive, but I think it's critical if we're going to engage in these difficult conversations, these difficult dialogues. And that includes number one, the students, and these are not in any particular order, but at any rate, the one thing that I really try to hit home in my classroom is that I want my students to be culturally competent. Even though the course may not be specifically focused on culture, I want them to be able to have conversations with people who are not like them and navigate those with comfort and with sensitivity to otherness. I want them to be other focused. So we here in the US are a part of an individualistic culture. Many of us are also members of other microcultures that are collectivistic in nature, and I want my students to take a collectivistic approach to how they're interacting with other people, so that they can connect and they can, affirm others in their identity and in that particular interaction. This also requires that students and people in general work towards being an effective communicator. Some people think that communication is easy. It is not. I believe that when students are taking our classes in communication studies or mass comm, they realize that communication is much more complex, and you have to be invested in it in order to be an effective communicator. And two qualities that I think are very important are empathy. So this means that you're going to have compassion for someone who is different from you. And as Dr. Cash and Dr. Edozie have already noted, we are dealing with some very difficult times in the US. And I think empathy is critical to getting us through and I guess I would say thriving, in spite of, or maybe even because of, the racial tensions that are plaguing us on not just a day-to-day basis, but for many of us on an hourly basis. Being an effective communicator also, means that individuals need to be culturally aware. So when you are not only, in a different country or in a space where you're interacting with someone who's different from you, regardless of the context, we always need to work towards being culturally, aware. People are born into cultures that are different from the ones that we affiliate with. And it's imperative, that we keep that at the forefront of our minds when we are interacting with, people in general. I also have an expectation that my students are going to engage in self-reflexivity. So that's, self-reflexivity is directly related to self-awareness. And I think that being self-reflective ultimately leads to being self-aware. And what I mean by self-reflexivity, is pausing or expecting an individual, and this includes myself, to pause and really think about the experience that they're having in that moment. And in this case, we're talking about, race and other difficult topics. I personally try to challenge my students to think critically, about their own identities and how those identities are impacting the conversations that they're having, the worldview that they have, when it comes to issues of diversity, or their worldviews, in general. I think by taking a moment and pausing to think about that space that they occupy, or those intersectional identities, individuals are able to have a greater understanding, and maybe even a more in-depth, understanding of human diversity and what their role is in, maybe impacting the realities and experiences of others, and vice versa. Self-awareness just means, being more cognizant of how you are interacting with other people, and you're paying attention to the way that you are, communicating, your word choice. How are you adapting to the other person? And I'm going to quickly use an example here of self-awareness as it relates to me. I remember several years ago teaching a graduate class, and it was interracial communication. And during the break, the students and I were talking, and I forget exactly what brought it up, but we were talking about maybe, I don't know, I was probably talking about either food or a sale of some kind. And I told whomever that I try to be very mindful when I'm shopping. And I used the term gyp, not realizing the negative connotations it had. I was talking about being financially conservative and not being taken advantage of. And a graduate student said, he explained to me that was an offensive term. And I was like, oh, I had no idea. But it didn't matter in that moment that no one present was a gypsy. I did not know that gyp was a derivative of the noun gypsy, and is a very derogatory term associated with gypsies, meaning that they are not necessarily nomads, but they travel around countries and are ultimately looking to take advantage of people. So once he told me that, I was like, oh wow, I don't know if I've ever interacted with someone who is who identifies as a gypsy, but I apologized to them, and I said I will never use that again. It just took me that one time to be receptive to the feedback of someone else to change my behavior. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm learning every day just like everyone else, but self-awareness is essential. I also think it's important for us to promote critical thinking skills in the classroom. Challenge students to think critically, about the course readings, the course activities, everything that you're engaging in, during the course of that semester. The students might think, oh my goodness, it's just another assignment, or this is another task, I just have to check off my list. But I think it's imperative that we do introduce activities that will, have them excited about what we are learning, and I also tell them I'm learning as well, but I stress to them, that critical thinking is essential. And lastly, I think by promoting all of these skills, we can ultimately lead to a transformative classroom. And I won't go into detail just yet about some particular incidents that have happened, but during the course of many semesters of teaching, my students and I have paused during a discussion to have a specific discussion about what the expectations are of the classroom and its role in being a transformative space. And I tell them, I know that each one of you is taking this class in order to graduate. So hopefully you've performed well enough so that you can graduate. But my concern is that we all move towards being better human beings, that we are more mindful, we're more sensitive to others, and are using what we're learning in this classroom to make an impact beyond these four walls. And thankfully, I've been in contact with many students over the years, and Dr. Pugh is an example of that, these interactions I'm having with these students post-graduation demonstrate to me that they are applying what they're learning in the classroom. And this is exactly, what I think we're supposed to be doing, or at least I'm supposed to be doing, is in my classroom, is having students essentially develop life skills that are going to impact not only them, but the others with whom they will be interacting and forming bonds with, over the course of their personal and professional lives. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the foundation, but as was already mentioned in my introduction, I come from a military family. My dad was in the Navy, and my family had the distinct honor and pleasure of living in Rota, Spain. We moved there when I was 2.5. I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was, but we lived there for 4.5 years. And you would think that at that young of an age, maybe I wouldn't remember much about the culture or the experience, but that form of cultural immersion, I mean, my goodness, I mean, it I believe, played a critical role in helping shape my identity and, by extension, my commitment to diversity issues and appreciation of different cultures. My mother actually told me a few years ago that Spanish was my first language. And I was like, oh, that's good. I can't put that on my CV anywhere, but I do take pride in that because I was afforded an opportunity that most people are not. And so by being culturally immersed in Spain, it just opened my eyes to so many different realities and things that I believe have served as a foundation for all of the work that I do. So what you see in the pictures on the slide are two photos from 2 different years of when I taught my study abroad program that I was directing while I was at the University of Georgia. I developed it from scratch. The program is called International Perspectives on Interracial Communication, or we called it IPIC. Every year I had to go and I'm sure that many of you might be familiar with this process if you teach abroad, but I had to go into different classrooms to pitch the program. And sometimes there were students that I had never seen before when I was going to these classrooms who, applied for admission into the program. So over time, the program gained a very impressive reputation. Students were clamoring to get in. Sometimes I had to beg to get them, to apply because of financial reasons. Students, not all students could participate, but I have the distinct pleasure of saying that program ran for 11 years. And it was an award-winning program. Unfortunately, when I left the University of Georgia, the program was non-existent, but I pretty much developed that from scratch with the help of the staff in the UGA Costa Rica office. The program lasted for 3.5 weeks, And with the students were exposed to Afro-Caribbean culture, and of course, Costa Rican culture, ecotourism, sustainability. We spent time, with the Bribri, the Bribri, who are an indigenous group of people there, and we were invited to spend time in the Bribri indigenous territory, going on a hike, with Timoteo, who is the leader of the Bribri. And we also participated in service learning projects. And this program, like all other study abroad programs, is an example of experiential learning. I wanted students to get into the culture, and while they were learning, I was learning alongside them. And then we have, many of all the assignments were intensive. They involved a level of intensive self-reflexivity. I had the students reflect on their identities, as however they identified in terms of their race, ethnicity, and culture while we're in the US. And then once we were in Costa Rica, I had an activity where they had, or a big assignment, where they had to reflect on their experiences in country and how that impacted how they perceived themselves and how they understood themselves as foreigners in this new land. And I can say that I'm not sure exactly what year in the program it was, but I've learned that I don't want to say all of the Costa Ricans refer to foreigners as this, but I learned that they refer to those of us in the US as gringos. And I was like, I'm a gringo? I had no idea. I always thought that was a term that was used to reference white people. I was like, oh, okay. You learn something new every day, but I wasn't offended by that. I don't know if I should be or not. Maybe that's a project down the road, but all right. So at my experience with teaching in Costa Rica and in the classrooms at the University of Georgia, as well as here at LSU, are what I believe, and I'm committed to saying that they are transformative classrooms. So what does it mean to have a transformative classroom? For me, this includes or involves having inclusive and multicultural course material. So you have authors who are bringing in their diverse backgrounds into the actual literature that's being shared with the students. And thankfully, when I'm using a lot of the articles, I know many of the authors. And so sometimes I will have them come and speak to my class, or I'll tell my students, oh yeah, I know this person. That person is really cool. And I hope the students are benefiting from that. But I think it's important for them to be exposed to literature that lets them know that there are multiple realities, multiple worldviews and experiences that are probably different from theirs. And it doesn't mean that one is better than the other, but they do exist. Something else that I think is critical is establishing ground rules for classroom discussion. And I think ultimately by having these ground rules, you will foster openness and vulnerability in the classroom. And that is something, those two are qualities I think that I tend to exhibit in the classroom as well. I tell my students when I've experienced racial microaggressions or macroaggressions or any other experience that I think can help them grasp the material. So one example of a ground rule is that we agree to disagree. So in our textbook, the Orby and Harris interracial textbook, the textbook titled Interracial Communication Theory into Practice, lays out ground rules that can be established in the classroom that, and I believe, let the students know, that you are going to be talking about some very difficult topics. You're going to have these conversations with your peers that might be a little bit uncomfortable, but this is, I don't want to be cliche and say this is a safe space, but essentially it is. I encourage them to make sure that whatever discussions we have in the classroom are contained here so that students don't run and tell other classmates about what happened in the class if it was something that was, troubling or troubling for maybe one or more of the students in a negative way. And what I mean by that is, if someone made a comment and the class, had a kind of a response to it, don't stigmatize that one student. Let's talk about it as a class, and hopefully we can learn from that. If you go outside the classroom and talk about it with other, peers, then those students might stigmatize them as well. So I try to dissuade that as much as possible. I also think it's important that when you're trying to establish a transformative classroom, that you demonstrate to the students that that we're essentially moving from theory to practice. So you're going to understand these theories, but now we're going to put them in practice. This is how they relate to the real world. And you'll see a bit more of that in the later in the presentation. I also think it's important to have applied activities and assignments where the students are engaging, with, materials, whether it's mass media or text that, they have regular exposure to. And I think that's important because then now they're thinking critically about the way that they watch television or how they use social media. And I also believe in role playing and perspective taking. And I have an activity, I don't have time to go in great detail about that, but I was inspired by the experiment that not Peggy McIntosh, but Jane Elliott conducted, I think it was in 1968 when Martin Luther King was assassinated. She is an educator. Now she's very proactive in terms of educating people and businesses and organizations and universities about privilege and whiteness and racism and all that entails. But she conducted the brown-eyed blue-eyed experiment. And I thought to myself, once I saw the documentary, I thought, how could I do that in my class without not really living with my students, but she's got them she had them at a very young age and was able to shape the way that they viewed the world early in their lives. But in higher ed, I'm receiving students after they have established their identities, not completely, but they have a sense of who they are at 18 years of age. And when they're taking my class, they're 20. And so I don't know what I'm getting in the classroom. So I don't have the luxury to expose them to these contents and this material early in their lives. And so I created an activity that is a simulation of that. And students really love it. I love it. I get excited when I see it on the syllabus, and they're probably like, why is she so crunk about this activity? But once we go through it, they see how impactful it is. And the two other things that I think are instrumental in creating a transformative classroom is to challenge the students in ways that allow them to reflect on their cultural literacy. So becoming more knowledgeable about other cultures, and media literacy, just being more critical about the media to which they are exposed. So something that I think is really critical for these conversations, and I think that this is critical not only within the classroom but elsewhere, is for individuals to have an understanding of some basic concepts. So, and these are they're basic, not in a negative sense, but they are, I think, essential to understanding our differences and how we can have these productive dialogues and conversations. And that is interracial communication. And I tell my students when I'm teaching in interracial, well, I introduce it into every class. But when I talk about interracial communication, I stress to them that interracial communication or communication becomes interracial when race becomes a salient issue when two people of different races are communicating with each other. So I'm going to quickly, pick on Dean Cash. So he and I don't know each other. We've just, talked twice, via Zoom. So let's say that he and I are hanging out and we're talking, and then all of a sudden, one of us might make a comment and say, "Wow, you're really unique for a white person or a Black person." I'm sure that probably will not be seen as a compliment. Maybe it was intended as one, but then by that comment being made, race becomes salient. And so now it's like, okay, so everything was okay beforehand. We were engaging in interpersonal communication, but now race is impacting the way that we are interacting with each other. I do want to stress that interracial communication, or when race becomes salient, it does not have to be a negative thing. It can be positive. But nevertheless, when we talk about interracial communication, the topic of race becomes salient. I think it's important for people to know the difference between race, culture, and ethnicity. And I don't have it on here, but nationality is something that I think also is really important. Some people may, ask some people. I've had colleagues and I've had students who are, from diverse backgrounds, and they will tell me that someone has said, "Oh, well, what's your nationality?" And I'm like, they don't mean nationality. I mean, what they want to know is that person's race or ethnicity. But at any rate, you know, when I'm teaching these classes, I think it's important for people to know that this is what race is. So race is talking about phenotypic, you know, features, culture is talking about traditions, and then ethnicity is referring to like the group in which you know, a person is born. We talk about implicit bias. So I think this is critical for people to know that we all have these biases, and once we are aware of them, we become involved in or we engage with self-reflectivity, we can fight those biases. There's racial prejudice, and that's when you know, have prejudgments or you believe stereotypes about different racial ethnic groups. We all have some, you know, racial prejudices to some extent. Racial discrimination is when you act on that racial prejudice. And here we go, there's nationality. And then I'm gonna save the best for last. We'll talk about racism in just a moment. I've already mentioned ethnicity. Ethnocentrism is when, you know, a person or a group of people believe that their group is superior in comparison to others. And I believe that when I was teaching my study abroad program in Costa Rica, this was something that was pervasive. You know, students would say, well, why did they do this here? Well, that's dumb. That doesn't make sense. And I would take that as I would see that as an opportunity for a teachable moment to tell my students that, well, this is how things are in Costa Rica, and we need to just go with the flow. We need to adapt. Don't impose our cultural beliefs and values, you know, onto them. So when it comes to racism, my students have a difficult time accepting this definition. They think that anybody can be racist. I don't think that they're trying to advocate for people to be racist, but you know, they're like, oh, well, I have an understanding of what it means, and it's something that can be applicable to all racial groups, and that's not true. And this is based on, you know, decades and decades of research. So racism is racial prejudice plus societal power. And I hit that point home, you know, every single time I talk about it in class and elsewhere. And when I do that in the classrooms, and students are like, well, is there ever a time when someone, is there ever a time when a non-white group can be racist? And so I'll say in other countries, yes. Here in the US, the dominant group, or the group that has societal power, is whites. And so they're the only ones who can commit you know, racism. And they tell me, oh, well, I don't agree with that. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I mean, this is the only answer I'm going to accept on the test. So if you want to give another answer and lose those points, that's totally fine. But I tell them that it's, you know, this definition is not mine. It is, you know, proven, you know, through extensive research over, you know, over the years. But I, you know, hit home that it's imperative that we recognize the difference between racism and racial prejudice. We all have biases, we all have prejudice, and it's imperative that we pay attention to the role that societal power plays in these different dynamics. And two other terms that are really important include microculture, macroculture, and those terms are essentially substitutes for majority and minority. Or yeah, some people will, you know, say subculture, so you have the dominant culture and the subculture. And I personally move away from using those terms because they kind of tend to minimize and diminish the significance of microcultural groups. So I've been, for several years now, changing my language to reflect something that I think is a little bit more affirming and creates some parity in terms of the groups that, or multiple groups that we're discussing. And then lastly, another important concept is knowing what stereotypes are, and then meta stereotypes. And I believe that when I tell my students that we have meta stereotypes, and that meta stereotypes is referring to an awareness of stereotypes that are placed on groups to which I belong, or to which you belong. So for example, I know that there are stereotypes associated with Black women. And so because I'm aware of those, I will probably actively engage in behaviors that will counter those stereotypes. And so I don't want to belabor that point, but those are important. Those are terms that I think are really important, and they are what I call a part of an essential vocabulary. And really quickly, I'll just say that when I have discussions with my older brother about racism, you know, we've had these conversations, you know, several times over the course of our lives. And he's like, yeah, well, I think anybody can be racist. Oh, by the way, my older brother's Black. And so I'm like, no, no. And I tell him that societal power is a part of that. He's like, no, I disagree. And I'm like, well, I've been doing work on this for a long time. I have the research to support it. And then I just say, no, I'm not going to talk about it anymore, because he likes to engage in a lot of debate. But I was like, yeah, we're not going to have this conversation anymore, because he's not going to change his ideas, his beliefs, and that's totally fine. He does recognize that racism exists, but I think that over time, in general, we have gotten to a point as a society where we don't pay as much attention to societal power. But within like the last year, I think that has become magnified and critical to many people's changing in terms of their worldview. So what I want to share with you all is an exercise, or what I call an exercise in self-reflexivity, where we're moving from theory to practice. So the 2020 racial pandemic in the US has illuminated for many of us the urgency of frank conversations about racism, and a recognition that racism is a system of oppression that is affecting all racial groups, but in materially different ways. And what I'm going to be sharing with you all is the CRAM model, and it's the Confronting Racial Micro and Macroaggressions model that Blake Abbott and I developed in 2011. He was a graduate student at the time at the University of Georgia. This is a four-stage approach that I believe is effective in helping people to identify racial microaggressions, confront them, or maybe, well, sometimes they confront them, sometimes they don't, but ultimately, and I believe that having an awareness of this four-stage model can lead people to combating racism. Excuse me. Okay, so I say that this is a self-reflective approach because I use data from my classroom, and I did not, well, when I started doing this many years ago at the University of Georgia, I did not have any research funds to conduct the qualitative research that I love to do, or at the time would really like to do. And so one way that I realized that I can capture these classroom experiences is by getting IRB approval. And when I have students complete assignments, I want to use that as data. So when they're writing reaction papers, I provide them with consent forms. Only if they are willing to participate. I tell them your grade is not going to be impacted at all, but I just want to use this as data to better understand how to teach these very difficult topics and issues in the classroom. And so I'll have students write reaction papers to films that we've watched, and I've gotten several publications for that. And for this particular project, I had students reflect on, excuse me, racial transgressions that they observed either within or outside of the classroom, and how they responded to those interactions or those observations. And I told them to focus on interactions that involve family, friends, colleagues, and maybe even strangers. Of course, the individuals would be anonymous, but I wanted them to use this as an exercise to apply what they're learning in the classroom. And I wanted to illustrate to them that you can use your communication skills to break the cycle of racism. And I have been very pleased with how this assignment functions in the classroom, but more importantly, I think that it has great value beyond just a pedagogical tool. And so the book chapter that Blake and I published was titled Reframing the Rhetoric of Race Through Classroom. And so we specifically focused on Daryl Sue's definition of racial microaggressions. And I think the first time I became exposed to that was obviously prior to 2011, but I ran across his article where he defines what racial microaggressions are. So they are brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults towards people of color. And we focused on racial microaggressions because students were sharing over the years with me how they experienced these racial microaggressions and macroaggressions in nearly every aspect of their daily lives. as a Black woman, I've experienced them and continue to experience them. And I thought, you know what, I want my students to understand, you know, that these microaggressions are occurring, and to really understand how we can, you know, just break this cycle. We need to identify the behaviors and determine what our role is going to be in that process. And so I'm just going to go ahead and go to the next slide for the sake of time. So this is the 4-step model. The first thing the students are instructed to do, and this was after the students had completed the assignment, I noticed that, wow, there's a process going here. So the students, they received instructions for the assignment, and these steps coincide with, they coincide, you know, with the assignment, but they are specifically informed, you know, by the content, by the data that was generated from those reaction papers. And so the first step is for the students to identify the microaggression. And this involves contextualizing the encounter to ensure clarity regarding how the encounter evolved. So they would, so let's just take, for example, the definition I gave us all about interracial communication. They would focus on this interaction and think, oh, did this involve race at all? You know, and if it were with someone of the same race, it wasn't necessarily interracial, but it was a racial encounter because race became salient. So after they are in the first step, they move to the second step. And what I noticed was, or what we noticed was, that the students were using 3 different cues to determine, well, to describe and subsequently determine how they were going to respond to the racial microaggression. So it was the first is a relational cue. And so that was the relationship that they had with the other person. They would use that to determine whether or not they were going to confront the behavior. The context or the contextual cues are also important, and that refers to the physical environment within which the microaggression occurred. And the third is the emotional cue. And this is the emotional response that is elicited by the by the microaggression. And the emotions are referring to, you know, like maybe, you know, they've experienced the aggression, and now after having witnessed it, they became angry or frustrated and felt like, you know what, okay, I'm going to have to say something. So from there, they move on to the reaction to the racial microaggression or the macroaggression. And this is when they reflect on the interaction and they ask themselves questions like, you know, how did I react? How comfortable am I with my response? How did they respond? And how did I feel, you know, in that moment where I was being a part of this racial micro or macroaggression? And lastly, what influenced my decision to respond in that way? And then the last step is outcome. And this is where they assess the result of the outcome. And they're going to tell me whether or not they thought it was successful or unsuccessful. And I also give them the opportunity to reflect on whether or not, not whether or not, but how they would react if the same situation presented itself. Would they do the same thing, or would they adopt a different strategy? And I did that because I wanted them to, you know, recognize that even though they may have had negative interactions in the past, I don't want them to get stuck in the past. I want them to learn from that and think, okay, you know what, I wasn't, maybe they weren't comfortable confronting someone the first time that they experienced that. And now that they've had the experience and they have had time to reflect on it, they can develop strategies they can use, you know, in future interactions. So now I'm going to share with you all some examples of the microaggressions that emerged. So the reflections or the journals involve cognitive engagement, where there's reflection on their observations of racial encounters occurring within or outside of the classroom. One year I had the students journal all semester long, and I said, I am not doing that anymore at all, because it was exhausting and I wanted to beat myself up at the end of the semester. All right, so as I've already noted, the analysis process involved students identifying the microaggression, or I'm sorry, this is what we did as researchers. We identified the racial microaggression, we grouped them together, we looked essentially for themes, and then we were able to code each of the responses along the lines of the cue that we thought seemed to be most salient for the students. and then they had the reaction, and then there was the outcome. So there were 9 different responses to the racial microaggressions, and these were avoidant, casual consciousness, aggressive confrontation, active confrontation, helpless bystander, self-preservation, self-censure, mediation, and moments of self-reflection. So in the next several slides, I'm going to provide an example of each one of these and a definition. So the avoidant response, and this is defined as purposeful or active efforts to avoid confronting the behavior, which may include avoiding future interactions with the offender, or and that should be or perceived perpetrator. So the person, the student in this instance, chose to avoid having this confrontation. So 2 exemplars included one where, I mean, they were similar in that the N-word was used. And in one instance, the student noticed, I forget where they were. I'm assuming they were probably in Canada for them to see Canadian cyclists. I don't know if there were any in Athens at the time, but at any rate, they were around some cyclists, and another student was in a class that was taught by a Black professor. And excuse me, in each instance, the offending parties used the N-word, but in 2 distinctly different ways. So it was made clear that when the professor used the word, it was in a joking manner, and it was a way for him to issue the following warning to the class. And this is based on what the student said. So he said that it may become offensive at times, and that's how the class is. I may ask him, and this is, again, the student assessing the professor. I may ask him why it's okay for African Americans to use the N-word if they don't want other people using it. But that is the extent to which I will question him. So you've got a power dynamic that's at play. So casual consciousness involves pointed efforts to apply classroom knowledge and informally educate others about race without invoking guilt, shame, or blame. So this example has stood out to me for many years, and I believe that this came from a student's reaction paper, maybe way back in like 2007, or maybe a little bit earlier, but it was an interaction that she had with her grandparents. So she was at their home. They were gardening and doing things in the yard. They came in for lunch, and this is how she described this encounter. So one white female confronted her grandfather's reference to Brazilian nuts as N-word toes. She describes how after her grandparents explained how innocuous the phrase was, she still felt a need to educate them about how inappropriate, antiquated, and offensive their language was. According to her description in the assignment, her grandparents appeared naive about the offensiveness of their comments, but they were also receptive to what she had to say. And so she was letting them know about the class that she was taking and how important it was for her to share that knowledge with them. Then we have the aggressive confrontation. And this is where a deliberate effort is made to address the racist behavior of an offender. And so this was a confrontation that was somewhat volatile for a white male student who confronted his father, who referred to his tailor as the China lady. He chose to confront the racist behavior, and he described and these are his exact words, he described the behavior as latent subconscious prejudice and racism, with the potential for creating more harm than blatant overt racism, which is coming on the heels of an in-class role play activity. So I think that I had the role play activity, which made the student more aware of these stereotypes and how they're manifested in day-to-day experiences. And he felt, based on his personality, I think he probably would have addressed his concerns with his dad anyway, but he made a connection between the activity and the assignment. So he was more attuned to racial indiscretions that he may not have addressed otherwise. Then we have active confrontation, and this is a deliberate effort to address racist behavior of an offender, but with careful caution and without creating a defensive climate or posture. So it's different, from the response that I just mentioned. So a white female student was casually hanging out with her friends one evening playing the board game Scruples. The premise of the game is to, according to her, make players sweat as they ask each other what they would do in a moral predicament. The student made informal observations of her friends' behaviors and concluded that their decisions involved racial biases and racist language. Ultimately, she did address her concerns and observations with her friends, and she said that this resulted in a 30-minute substantive discussion of race, which she attributed to the class. Then we have the helpless bystander, and this is the perception of an inability to significantly impact the racist and inappropriate behaviors of others. And this example in particular has stood out to me for many years because this student he used this exact word in his paper. And when I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, this, I believe, beautifully captures the nuances of the difficulties that come, with trying to address racism. So he's a white male, and he journaled about his grandmother calling his African-American baseball teammate, she referred to him as that little N boy. And I think this was when he was much younger, so maybe 11 or so years old. He shares that he felt helpless in the fight against racism with his grandmother because of her espousal of racist ideologies that are in clear opposition to his own way of thinking. So in describing this awkward and obviously racist encounter, this student conveys to the reader his feeling of being a, quote, helpless bystander. The implication is that he's placed in the unfortunate position of not being able to confront he's not able to confront racially offensive behavior, thus rendering any such efforts futile. And what he stressed was that this is his grandmother's way of thinking, and she's not going to change. And he really felt that it was useless for him to try and correct her behavior. Self-preservation is another theme, and this is the decision to not engage in confrontational behaviors that risk one's face. And so that's face-saving impression management. So a white male describes his reaction, how his white female friend was treated by a group of African-American women at a club. The white female was dressed very provocatively, and several people in the group thought her outfit was inappropriate and contrary to her personality and identity as a female, even though she was a stranger and they knew nothing about her. So as they waited in line, and this is according to the student's account, they were waiting in line to get in the club. The African-American women were making inappropriate comments about the friend. And while his instinct was to protect his friend, the student opted to say nothing, but decided against it because he, quote, did not want to be perceived as the arrogant, aggressive, overly dominant white male that is so often criticized for his insensitivity towards issues concerning race and gender differences. And so he was concerned with how he was presenting himself to others in that particular context, and opted to not confront or address the disconcerting behavior. Then we have self-censure, and this is the choice to self-monitor for fear of being offensive. So one white female described how she actively engages in self-talk or intrapsychic conversations about race before sharing her thoughts with the class. This is an attempt, according to her, to ensure that her ideas and feelings are interpreted the way I intend for them to be, which she believes is a common practice for many of her classmates. Fear of being misinterpreted, and in order to avoid being misunderstood or perceived as a racist, I see a grammar error, my apologies. This is the driving motivation behind this strategy. So individuals don't want to be perceived as being racist, so they choose to be very careful in what they're saying, or they might choose to not communicate at all. Then there's mediation, and this is an individual's assumed role as mediator between the offender and the offended party. And this is all in an effort to resolve racial tensions while recognizing the offensive nature of the racial microaggression. So female friends, this is a white student, a female's friend made an inappropriate remark to an African-American couple attending a country and Western concert. This drew the attention to them being the only non-white people attending the concert in an aborted attempt to relate to them. So the woman was trying to connect with them, and her friend, who was a student in the class, was embarrassed. So the student recognized the social blunder and offered an apology to the couple and qualified it by saying that she is extremely drunk and has been making inappropriate comments all evening. So the couple said they weren't offended, although the student was. So she followed up with the offender or her friend and advised her in the future to use a non-racial approach to have casual conversation with someone of a different race. So in other words, don't tell the people, I'm interacting with you because you're Black. Just treat them as people. And I'm sure that will go over much more smoothly than that did. The ninth theme that emerged was moments of reflection. And this is the decision to isolate an incident that may not have specifically involved race and write about it, or writing about the incident served as a result for the student as a catalyst for self-reflection or critical thought about race. So this is a comment that a white female made. After taking this class, I have come to the realization that all my friends are exactly like me. I do not have a single friend at Georgia who is of a different race or from a different culture. So she continues to share in the paper that she is disappointed that she did not take advantage of the opportunities the university had to offer her in terms of developing relationships with other students from a racial group different from her own. Her entry concludes with a resolution to make more concerted efforts in the future to diversify her friendship. And I also want to note that another activity in the class involved students immersing themselves. Well, they had to attend a cultural event, as a not necessarily not necessarily as a spectator or the objectifying the culture or the cultural group members, but they were to go and to participate to whatever extent is possible and to observe. And then they would reflect on what it felt like to be exposed to a culture different from their own and how their identity might have impacted their experience. And in doing that, the students had to choose a group that they're not a part of in order to really, I think, capitalize on that experience. And without fail, every time that I taught the course and had that assignment, students would tell me that they did not know that there were so many opportunities for them to be exposed to other cultures and races on campus, and they hated that they were just now learning about them, in their senior year. And so to me, that speaks to things that we can do as community members to engage students in very creative and innovative ways. So where do we go from here? So as this case study demonstrates, multicultural curricula have great potential to create global citizens within and outside of the classroom. Course readings, assignments, role play activities, and other pedagogical strategies that engage self-reflectivity or reflexivity help students identify effective ways to address racial and ethnic disparities in the spaces they can, do, and will occupy. By challenging students to reflect on a specific racial microaggression or macroaggression, they bear witness to the transformative potential that resides in our classrooms. Their critical thinking relative to multiculturalism ultimately offers what I believe is evidence that the classroom can and does become a transformative space and launching pad for global citizenry in powerful and impactful ways. And I think that this last point is magnified by the number of students who have reached out to me over the last year, telling me that the class that I taught, whether it was the spring, my last spring semester at Georgia in 2019, or I even had a student who reached out to me from 2009, who have told me that they were using what they learned in that class to have difficult conversations with their family members, and friends, about all the issues that we were seeing in the news. I had a student who I taught here at LSU last spring contact me, and it was shortly after the murder of Mr. Floyd. And she was, saying that she was trying to talk with her mother about, why the riots were occurring, why people were lashing out, and why there was violence. And we know that some of those individuals who were engaging in violence and inciting violence were not concerned with the issue at hand. They were planted there for by different groups and maybe even themselves to diminish the impact and the importance of those protests. So when she emailed me and asked me to help her figure out a way to talk to her family, I said, okay, let me just take a minute. I had deadlines that I was working on for publications or whatever. I said, let me just take some time to help her out, because I want to be a part of the solution and not the problem. So within 20 minutes of sitting down and responding to her email, I developed what I think a lot of people have appreciated, which is a metaphor for racism. And I initially called it an arranged marriage. No, did I say arranged? Yeah, I said arranged. And a colleague politely messaged me on Facebook when I posted it on my page, and she was like, it might be better to say forced marriage, because some arranged marriages don't necessarily have a negative connotation. I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. She's Indian, and that's part of her culture. So I was like, oh, thank you so much. And ever since then, I've changed that metaphor. But what I did was I explained how, using African Americans as an example, I said that the relationship between African Americans and the U.S. Is like a forced marriage, where you have the bride who was taken from her native country, her native land, to the U.S. She was forced into this marriage, and her, however you want to define the partners, is up to you. But just for the sake of the metaphor, I said, you have this husband that has promised to take care of her and nurture her, et cetera, has actually been more abusive to her. And she has cried out to people, family, friends, society. She's even gone to different agencies seeking help because she's experiencing, domestic abuse, and it's fallen on deaf ears. And what she has done is she has lashed out in anger. And so I said that to the student. I said, good luck, tell me how it goes. And then when she read it, she was like, this is perfect. And she asked if not only could she share it with her mother, but can she share it with her friends? And I said, yeah, share it with whoever you want to share it with. And I got the idea of recording it. So I got my video together. I created a video, and I'm just essentially reading verbatim that metaphor. And I posted it on my Facebook page, and I got permission from the student to tag her. I tagged her in it, and I was like, I hope this is going to be helpful to someone. And then before I knew it, long story short, several months later, I saw that had 500, not 500, 5,000 views and shares. And I was like, oh, what does that mean? I was like, at least some people are, relating to it. And so I just privately messaged a former graduate student of mine, and she was like, that means you're an influencer. I was like, oh, so I need to add that to my CV. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to add it to it. But to me, that was very affirming, and it was powerful, because I think that when we're talking about these different issues, it's imperative that we use language that is relatable and can help us to really understand the experiences and realities of others. And so I guess the last point that I want to leave you all with is that I hope that we can all, quote unquote, get in the trenches and become more enlightened about and proactive in dismantling racism, one relationship at a time. Thank you very much.
Very informative, Dr. Harris. Thank you so much. We have lots of time for engagement and Q&A after that really informative, provocative, and dynamic presentation. So if you'd like to simply raise your hand, I'll call on you. You could put your question in the chat if you want, and we'll see it there, but the floor is open. And while we're waiting, go ahead, Dr. Harris.
Got a pout on my face, okay.
While we're waiting, maybe I have a quick question for you to ponder while everybody else is. So it goes back to your example about what racism is and what it is not. Mm-hmm. And I'm like you in relation to your brother. I have a brother the same who gives me the same response. Racism can be practiced by everyone, not just at least in America by non people of color. Basically. It's not really just about white supremacy. It's about everyone can be a racist. And I, give the same response that you do now. We've got racial prejudice, but really racism is systemic. It's based on, the dominant group, and it's based on political and social power. And I get the same response that you get, which is, well, let's agree to disagree, but I don't agree with you. But how do we, as intellectual professionals, in the classroom especially, but to our colleagues, how do we persuade them, about this a bit more? Some of the examples that I get, though, to counter, my position on racism is that, well, there's intramural, sort of racism, and they call it racism, not just prejudice. I'd say, well, yeah, there's intramural prejudice, but not, racism. But they'd say, well, it is racism because, you've got, concentric circles of societal power. You can have local power, you can have familial power, so you can enact your racial stereotypes in a powerful way, in a local contextual way. And why wouldn't that be racism if you do enact your prejudices, based on the power that you have in that community or in that local space or that contextual space? So how do we describe intramural, prejudice, and when that prejudice is harmful, right? When it's not just, based in the context of white supremacy.
Yeah, so what I try to do is to introduce multiple concepts to my students, and even when I'm having informal conversations with people and race comes up, I tell them to look at the individuals in different institutions, different organizations and professions, who are in the positions of power. So if you go to their homepage, who are those individuals who are in the highest positions? And no offense to the white men who are here or white men in general, but most of them are going to be white men and possibly white women. And so, I show them, I want them to look at the physical evidence. So, they might not agree with the numbers, but I'm like, just go and look. Even if you're watching a television show, who are the producers of these shows? How are they centering the characters? And so I think there's a lot of evidence out there that shows, that there is a power, imbalance. And I also try to demonstrate that, yes, racism is systemic. It's systemic because we have these structures that have been in place that are going to they're going to place some at an advantage, and they're going to also at the same time perpetuate disadvantages for other groups. So it's the system is being perpetuated by individuals who are conforming to these expectations, and it might even be subconscious. Where I'm sure that if we we're all to think about if we all had the opportunity to hire somebody in our workspace, we are going to reference the circles that we know, the people that we're connected to. And if you have more people who are part of the majority group, they're going to look at people who are like themselves. And that might not be, driven by overt racism, but I think it's, subconscious. And so we have to be aware of that. Another thing that I do is I try to clear things up so that students can understand, or people can understand, that yes, we have racism, but when you have it occurring within, if there are isms that are going on within a particular group. So I'm just going to use African Americans. I will tell them, okay, now that is not racism, that's colorism. So you have colorism going on because there's a preference for individuals who are of lighter skin, and I'll pull in examples from pop culture to demonstrate this for the students, or I will tell them my experiences with it, where I had a friend, I don't even know who this woman was. She was talking to my mother and was asking about me, and I wasn't there, but my mom, well, clearly I wasn't there because she could have asked me myself. But my mother was saying that the woman was trying to talk about me, but she was like, yeah, well, your daughter, because I have a sister, and she was like, the dark one. And I was like, the dark one? I mean, well, if you look at my sister, she's lighter skinned, And between the two of us, I am the darker of the two, but that hit me a certain kind of way because I was like the dark one. She made it seem like, well, I wasn't there, but I felt like, it was framed in a very, negative way. I need to find out who that lady is and we need to have a talk. No, but anyway, but I tried to use easily accessible examples so that people can understand that, all of this is very complex, but yet it's simple, at the same time.
Thank you, thank you. So now I think we have some questions. Okay, I see Chidima. Chidima is raising her hand. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Harris. I just told a new incoming first-year student at LSU to take their mother as my dear girlfriend from undergrad. And so you may have a student that will be taking one of your classes. I just said you were a bad you-know-what. So thank you for your time and your expertise and sharing it with us. What I wanted to, so I'm a doc student in the School of Global Inclusion and Social Development here at UMass Boston. And I taught during my MSW program at the University of Michigan. And so I was encouraged by how you teach in your pedagogy because I employed a lot of that in my classroom, even as a graduate student instructor. And a fair amount of my undergraduate students, mostly first years, some second years, really appreciated that because their faculty, meaning tenure track or tenured faculty, were not employing those same tools and approaches. So my question for you, because you touched on some of it, and there's some comments in the chat about PWIs, and many of us have experiences in predominantly white institutions. How do instructors, faculty or TAs or GSIs, whatever you want to call educators that want to be equitable educators, how do they, because the first thought after you concluded was, we need to clone you everywhere, right? That said, that kind of defeats the purpose, right? So we each get to be authentic in how we show up in the classroom as educators, and yet we do need administrators' buy-in. So I wanted you to speak to the relationship or collaborative efforts that educators can have with administrators, because a lot of decisions are being made by administrators as if they've forgotten what it was like to be a graduate student or a faculty member.
Okay. Well, I'm going to answer your question in just a minute, but can you do me a favor and message me in the chat area and give me that student's name? I can reach out to her and we can connect, and I'll help her out however I can.
100%. I would love to. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think that it really is important for faculty and administrators to work together to understand how they can how can we move forward in a world, in a country where it does exist. And now, since we've had this racial pandemic, people are saying that they really see these disparities now, and how are we going to respond to that? I think moving forward, it's very difficult. I mean, it's doable, but people have to really buy into it. And something that I've been learning, lately, and observing, everything that's going on, experiencing it myself, and just talking with other people, is that some individuals stand the risk of virtue signaling, where they are presenting themselves to others as having genuine care and concern about diversity, and they're saying the right things publicly, but then when it comes down to it, when the rubber meets the road, they're not really following through. And so I think that administrators along with faculty really need to be willing to take those risks and have these frank discussions about what are we doing to really achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have a book chapter that I just that was just released on what I'm calling a trifecta, where you've got diversity that is there. In short, I think that they're treated very differently. So you have diversity, equity, and inclusion, but you're not really taking into account once you have these people who are not of the majority group coming into these spaces, they don't feel like they're included. They're just a number, and now you can say we're diverse, but do they really feel connected? And is everything really fair? Are they being paid the same amount as someone else of their rank, and so on? And so there's a lot to to unpack there. But I think that that we need to hold ourselves accountable, to how we're responding to these changes. And I'm including myself in that number. Thankfully, as an endowed chair, I have, well, people keep telling me I have power. I'm like, I don't know what kind of power I have. I'm just doing what I know is the right thing to do. And I do have some power in that, I'm the chair of the diversity committee. And so I'm like, okay, this is my charge. Then there's going to be there will be some changes, but I'm not the kind of person who's going to bulldoze or anything like that. I'm collaborative. I work, as a team. And so I have buy-in from our interim dean, our former dean, well, not former dean, but the dean who hired me passed away suddenly of a massive heart attack last September. And personally, I was just devastated. He was a great man. He really understood issues of diversity and was trying to do the right thing. And so I'm just like, wow, it's a huge loss, for his family, but it's a huge loss for, the rest of us who really want to, take steps forward. And so I'm working, with my, colleagues here and with administrators about, what kind of change do we want to see, changing the curriculum. So that includes, having an expectation that people are going to change, their courses, to reflect some of the, to reflect the diversity. We're not going to look at everybody's syllabus and say, oh, you need to teach this on this day. It's not going to be, controlling, but some of my colleagues have said, that in informal conversations, they kind of wonder, well, I'm all for this change, but what does that mean for me? How can I make that change? And so I think that we have to have these conversations, and people need to be open and forthcoming, regarding, their concerns, but what can we do to, take steps forward? And so I think that, everyone needs to buy in and, just dig deep. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Thank
It
you.
does. Thank you.
Okay.
There is this question in the chat. You've got lots of kudos in the chat, but this is a question and a kudos. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, Dr. Harris. Can you speak to the difficulties of having these kinds of discussions in or at predominantly white institutions? And this comes from Diana Martinez.
Okay. Yeah, those discussions can be very hard. One way that I try to, I guess you could say, minimize the difficulty, but still navigate those conversations is by having text for us to talk about, as opposed to the students using their own personal experiences. And what I mean by text is, I bring in a lot of pop culture. We'll talk about movies. We don't necessarily talk about books. Books are important. Books are essential, but I want the students to have some type of reference so that we can say, oh, well, when we watch this movie in class, they're making connections between the concepts, and the film. So they're showing, they're seeing theory to practice. But I also encourage students to share their own experiences with those, not necessarily with having watched the film, but some do. But if their experiences are similar to those that the character had, then I want to encourage the students to share that. And so that allows them to not, so a student might feel a little bit uncomfortable sharing their experiences, but they can say, oh yeah, I can relate to the character when the character did X. And I remember, distinctly many years ago, having a class discussion where I showed the movie White Man's Burden. And I'm not sure if you all are familiar with that. It was released in, I think, maybe 1998. And it starred John Travolta and Sidney Poitier. And it was about what I coin as the reversal of privilege, where you had Blacks were the majority group and whites were the, Blacks were the macro culture and whites were the microculture. And I found myself when I watched it before I showed it in class, and I was like, this is not right. They've got everything flipped. And then I had to question, why did I think that was wrong? I mean, I didn't think that it was wrong, but I was like, oh wow, like I drank the Kool-Aid. I was, believing that this is how the hierarchy should be. But then when I showed it in class, I mean, eventually, of course, I was like, girl, stop. And so I showed it to my students, and they were like, oh, it would never be like that. I think that the experiences that the white character had were exaggerated. And there's one scene, I won't spoil it for you all if you all plan to watch it, but there was one scene where John Travolta's character is stopped by the police. He lives in, unfortunately, they perpetuated the stereotypes of Black people living in public housing, but he lives in a very low, SES neighborhood, and he was stopped for no reason at all. And the student was like, yeah, that doesn't happen. And I'm like, yes, it does. And there was a student who shared a similar experience that her younger brother had when he and a couple of classmates from his high school were dressed in suits, stopped on the highway to help a woman who was stranded. Her car had broken down, and she's a white woman, and they got out and they helped her. The police came, and the police did not come to help her. They wound up taking those young men to jail. They didn't jail them, but they picked them up for whatever reason. And she stressed the fact that they were helping this woman, and they were wearing suits, and it was raining, and the police still stopped them. And then, and the student was still committed to believing that this was not true. I'm like, you have somebody right here telling you this is what's happening. I didn't tell her that, but that's what I was thinking on the inside. And so sometimes, it's very frustrating. Oftentimes I will use myself as a point of discussion, and I have to be mindful of that because I don't want to overtax myself, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually, because that could be, a lot. I had this activity that I did in class where I forget what I called it. It was called Who Do You Think I Am? And I had 10 questions that I had the students answer about me. So what's my favorite color? What's my favorite movie? Am I single or am I married? And after a while, I stopped doing that because I was like, yeah, y'all don't have any hope, and I'm single. And I was like, well, darn. And they would say that I'm single, but I have 3 kids. And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with being single and having 3 kids, but I would demonstrate to them how that might be informed by stereotypes. And then also, as a single woman, was very discouraging because I was like, y'all are not giving me any hope at all. But they would also say that my favorite movie was The Color Purple. I was like, I liked it, but it wasn't my favorite. So anyway, those conversations are difficult, but they're imperative.
Thank you so much. We do have to end, but I do want to just read, and maybe you could just quickly comment on these very last questions. They are important. One is from your former student, Jeff Pugh. So I really wanted him to get a chance to speak with you about that. He wants you to say more about your summer abroad, a program and the cultural context in which you create interracial and intercultural, learning competencies and opportunities. There is a very important one that I have here that I'd really like you to maybe listen to, and everyone should listen to. It's an anonymous call, and it says that our professors have tremendous power over us as budding scholars. He feels, or she feels, or they feel that white people ought to get together and talk about white fragility. The person feels that there has been a lot of microaggressions that they have experienced, and some examples are, where they bring up, difficult dialogues, and they're told that they won't get recommendations by their professors. And so here is somebody in the audience, really feeling, a lot of, sentiment and, a lot of reaching out to you to provide some, awareness and education on how to deal with climates like that. And others say, great, thank you. Please talk a little bit more about power and authority within organizations, and how microaggressions are dealt with in that context. And everyone says thank you. Thank you for such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. I'm excited. I can take a few more minutes if that's okay to address a couple of those questions.
Well, let's do that. But however, we did promise you an hour and a half, and if you feel that you have to leave, I'm sure you will. You will leave. And then please, Dr. Harris, thank you for extending the time. So please go ahead and try to respond to those questions.
Okay, so I'll respond to Dr. Pugh's question. So the way that the study abroad program wound up being designed was to slowly immerse the students in the culture. The first year we did the program, I did do a site visit and got a chance to travel the country and got a sense of what the students would be experiencing to some extent. But initially, the way that the program was designed was we spent at least like a week and a half or two in San Jose, and then we would move to Puerto Viejo, which is the Afro-Caribbean part of the country. And so we're in the first night we stayed at nobody stayed at a hostel, but anyway, we were in a diverse area of the country, and we were exposed to ecotourism. We had a lot of excursions and whatnot. And then we went to another part of the country that kind of on vacation. We couldn't say that vacation in the study abroad program. And then we went back to the campus. And I didn't like the way that was designed because the students were, the first part of the program had them essentially living like we were in the US. And so I was like, oh, that needs to change. How can I change this? And it just so happened that it was serendipity in that the next year when the program was offered, there was another, we eventually had to move so that we were going to the campus first and then going to the city. And then after that, we went to San Jose, went Puerto Viejo, and then another part of the country, and then back to campus. And what I liked about that is that the students were like in the middle of the rainforest, or yeah, we were in the middle of the cloud forest, and then the city, and then we're in the jungle, and then we're back in the cloud forest at the end. And I believe that the way that that was designed was to ease them into the course content, as well as the culture, which worked out beautifully, in my opinion. And that students kind of felt a little bit more comfortable, with the way that it was designed. And a lot of every assignment, was designed to have them engage in self-reflexivity. And I did have to have a number of students, well, not a number, but a few times I did have to pull students aside and say, I don't know why you're in, I didn't say, I don't know why you're in the program, but I would kind of challenge them to really, embrace the experiences and to be more, mindful of how they're engaging, with local people. Don't use this kind of tone. Don't be the loud, obnoxious American. And so, the students still to this day, come to me and they tell me how life-changing the study abroad, experience was with them. We had what I called program affiliates. So these were individuals who would give lectures to my students. They would share with them how they should adapt to the culture. And one friend he died suddenly, of a heart attack prior to me even coming to Costa Rica. He died in November. I had no idea that he had passed. And I went there the following summer expecting to, introduce my great students to him. And it was just devastating. But he would have a presentation where he would, tell the students about nonverbals in Costa Rica and how, people are in your personal space and don't take it personally. They're not trying to hit on you. They just, have a different way of navigating space. And they also have direct eye contact. Don't take it offensively, because here in the US, somebody might think that's a sign to fight. And so he said, just look back at them. And so I've, found my students, just, they weren't stalking people, but they were, adapting to the culture. So there are a lot of nuances to a study abroad program that I think can maximize the experiences for the students to where they are far removed from ethnocentric thinking and more culturally competent. Again, the other question was about white professors. I think that we do have to have a lot of buy-in from our white colleagues, especially those of us who are teaching at predominantly white institutions. I mean, if there is no dialogue, if there is no commitment, then things are going to remain the same. And I believe that it's possible that the reservations that some people might have might be that they're not interested at all, which, that's their prerogative, but there also might be individuals who are threatened by, what that means. they may think that that's going to deny them other opportunities, or they might be evaluated in a different way. I'm not sure of all of the nuances of that, but people need to be rest assured that we are any individuals who are looking for social justice and racial justice in the in our professional spaces and are addressing these issues of diversity are just looking for fairness and appreciation. And I'm not going to say tolerance because I hate that word. Who wants to be put up with? Nobody. But I think that it boils down to appreciation. Okay, were there any other questions?
I think that was pretty good and fantastic. Dr. Harris, let me end this talk, although we don't want to, but I know many have to leave. So please, McCormack scholars and our community who have joined us, let's give Dr. Harris, one more round of applause.
Thank you. And I did see Stacy Vanderveer. I don't know if that's her or not. Had a question. I'll answer that one.
Okay, go ahead. Stacy is right there. So he is the chair of the department, by the way.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Vanderveer.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Stacy, unmute yourself.
No, sorry about that. I was trying to clap. I was just trying to clap and I had my raised hand. So, but it's been fantastic. And as I earlier comment said, I love the mix of research-oriented things to do with students with the personal reflection. I was thinking it must be very inspiring to be one of your students.
I have a meeting with them on Monday, so I'll ask them at 3 o'clock.
I can tell you it is.
And I do have to brag on Dr. Pugh. Well, first of all, do we go back all the way to 2001?
Yes.
Okay, so I think we were both 12 and 14 at the time. But I'm telling you, he was such an impressive young man, back then, and I am not surprised by all of these successes that have come his way. He's a hard worker. I know you already know this, but he's incredibly intelligent. And every time I see, his little post, his post on, on LinkedIn, and I don't know if you're on Facebook that much, but whenever I see it, I'm like, yeah, I'm so proud of him. So proud of him.
We are too.
Yeah, and I've had such a good time. Y'all have set me up for a great weekend. I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
That's great. For us too. All right, everyone.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dean Cash. Thank you, Rochelle Straker and Jack Lee for putting on this event. Thank you, Gifty, for all your organizational support. And thank you, everyone, for this beautiful Friday afternoon and joining us with the presentation from Dr. Tina Harris. Thank you so much.